This video is part of our Applications of Supply and Demand series. In this one, we're going to learn about consumer, producer, and social surplus. By the end of this video, you'll be able to define and give an example of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and social surplus. So before we get moving on this, I want you guys to keep in mind the chapter uses the word surplus in two very distinct ways. If we have a surplus of goods, the quantity supplied higher than the quantity demanded. So some goods go unsold. So there's a surplus of fidget spinners at 7-Eleven. They have them for sale, but nobody wants to buy them. So what happens? They keep getting discounted and discounted and discounted. It's very, very simple. But consumer surplus, producer surplus, and social surplus mean that the benefit of owning or buying or consuming or selling a good is higher than the cost. So keeping with the example, I get a lot of consumer surplus from buying fidget spinners because I think they're neat. I'd pay more for them than they cost, so I'm getting what I feel like is a good deal. Anyway, coming back to the rule of rational choice, and if you're playing the Flesh or Drinking game, now is a great time to take a drink. An action is rational if and only if its marginal benefit is at least as much as its marginal cost. So surplus exists anywhere where your marginal benefit is greater than your marginal cost. So it's the difference there. So for a consumer, the benefit that they get is the willingness to pay, which measures how many happy points they get from consuming the good. The cost is the price of the good, so the surplus is the difference between what you would have been willing to pay and what you actually had to pay. For the producer, for them, the price is a benefit because that's the money that they receive. But their cost is the cost to produce, obtain, or store the goods, their marginal cost. So their surplus, the producer's surplus, is price minus marginal cost. And then for society, the benefit is everybody's benefit put together. The cost is everybody's cost put together. So if you find your consumer surplus, your producer surplus, you can just add them together to come up with your social surplus. Social meaning to society. So for a very simple example, Clara produces widgets using input goods that cost on average $5 per widget and labor that costs on average $15 per widget. Tabitha likes widgets so much she would be willing to pay $50 per widget, but Clara sells them for $25. We want to figure out what consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus are. So once again, let's start off here. For the buyer, Tabitha, her benefit's going to be the willingness to pay. That's going to be her $50 willingness to pay. Her cost is going to be the price. That's the $25. For Clara, the seller, we're going to have the price, that $25, be the cost of the good, and then her cost is going to be the $5 plus the $15, so the total $20 cost. So let's throw some numbers in here. For Tabitha, we can calculate her consumer surplus by taking 50 minus 25. For Clara, we can take 25 minus the total cost, which is 20. And then what we have here is we can see consumer surplus is 25, producer surplus is 5, and social surplus, we get the answer the same way, whether we add up total benefit and subtract total cost, or whether we just add up producer surplus and consumer surplus. All right. But why are we doing this? Well, this is a way that we can measure the effects of decisions. So measuring surplus allows us to see who is made better off and who is made worse off. And if we want to do some redistribution, like as a student, if you want to do something that might harm the college a little bit, reduce their producer's surplus, but redistribute some of that to consumers, students, we might think that's a pretty good idea. So now I want you to pause the video and try this problem. I'll wait. All right. So, a textbook costs $65 to the bookstore, which sells it for a price of $80. Student would be willing to pay $100 for the book. What are consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus? So let's fill in some numbers. For the student, the benefit is the 100 they would have been willing to pay. The cost is 80. So that's going to put their surplus at 20. The bookstore, it's 80 minus 65 is 15. And for society, again, no matter which way we do it, whether we do 100 plus 80 is 180 minus 80 plus 65 is 145, that gives us 35. Or whether we take the student's consumer surplus of 20, the bookstore's producer surplus of 15, added together, we get 35 as social surplus.